Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Jennifer Pittman-Leeper. I'm the Field CISO with GovRamp, and I'm glad you're joining us for today's conversation. We're going to start with a simple idea that has significant implications for cybersecurity. Don't assume, verify. I'm sure we've all heard that before. In security, we spend a lot of time establishing requirements, implementing controls, assessing environments, and putting processes in place. All those things matter, but there's a point after those controls are established that we're not talking about enough. How do you know those expectations are still true tomorrow, next month, or 6 months from now? That's really what we're going to explore today, the role of continuous visibility in maintaining security over time. Before we get into the conversation, I'd like to introduce the people joining us today. We have Simon Azzopardi, the CEO of CoreView. He's also a collaborator with Microsoft and a leading analyst on threats relating to Microsoft 365. We also are joined by Jonathan Askins. He's the former CIO for the state of Arkansas. After leaving state service, he joined CoreView as the Director of Business Development. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I'll be representing GovRamp's perspective throughout the discussion. CoreView is a premier GovRamp member, and we're pleased to have them with us today because they bring a practical perspective on what continuous visibility looks like inside a very complex technology environment. Importantly, this isn't intended to be a product demonstration or a sales conversation. Rather, we're using CoreView's experience to help illustrate the cybersecurity problem that we're all talking about. We do have a Q&A section in today's webinar. Please feel free to drop your questions in there, and we'll be sure to address those at the end of today's presentation. So we're going to move through 4 parts today. First, the assumption. The things that organizations naturally believe once they've established security expectations. Second, we'll talk about the reality. Technology environments change, sometimes in ways that aren't always immediately visible. Third, the response. What continuous monitoring and resilience can look like in practice. And finally, the takeaway. How organizations can move from simply trusting that security is working to actually being able to verify it. So let's start with the question at the center of this entire conversation. How do you know? You trust your technology providers, and I'm not telling you not to. You establish security expectations. You put controls and processes in place. Those are all very necessary. But then comes the question, what tells you when something changes? This isn't a question about whether agencies have security controls. You do. It's not a question about whether organizations have security requirements. You do. The question is what happens after those expectations and controls are established, because technology environments aren't static. People change, access changes, configurations change, integrations change, and the threat environment changes. So the question becomes, how do you know when something changes? When we talk about assumptions, we're not talking about organizations being careless. These assumptions are actually pretty reasonable. An organization may have a person responsible for monitoring changes. It may have a process for managing access. It may have configuration standards. It may have a backup process and a recovery process. The issue isn't having a process. The issue is that having a process isn't the same as knowing that the process is working as intended and verifying that it's working as intended. I would say there's a couple of examples here. We assume someone is watching out for changes. We assume our configuration is what we intended. We assume that if something goes wrong, we'll know. But assumptions aren't evidence. And that's the distinction that I want to focus on today. The risk doesn't necessarily come from having the wrong control. The risk can come from believing the control is working without having the visibility to verify it. And that's what becomes particularly important because the environment we're trying to secure is constantly changing. Like I said, security posture isn't static. Even if you establish the right baseline today, the environment around that baseline continues to evolve. Employees join and leave, roles change, permission and privileges change, policies, configuration, they all change. New applications come into your environment. New integrations are needed, those change. New vulnerabilities and attack techniques emerge. None of these changes are inherently malicious per se. Maybe the attacks are definitely malicious, but the others aren't. But that's part of what makes this difficult. A legitimate administrator can make a change. A new employee can receive access. A new application can be connected. Policies can be modified for legitimate business reasons. But from a security perspective, those changes still matter. The challenge isn't knowing where you started, it's knowing where you've moved. And that's where visibility becomes important. If security expectations establish the baseline, then visibility helps us understand what happens after that baseline is established. We're moving from simply defining what should be true to understanding what is actually happening. That means establishing expectations, observing the environment, verifying when reality differs from those expectations, and then responding based on what we know. Continuous visibility helps move cybersecurity from assumption to informed action. I've talked this morning a little bit about why assumptions can create blind spots and why security environments don't stand still. But the next question is, what does continuous visibility actually look like in practice? To help us explore that, we're going to look closely at the Microsoft 365 environment and the kinds of changes organizations need to be able to see. CoreView brings a practical perspective to this problem, and as a premier GovRAMP member, they're helping bring this conversation to the community. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Simon. Simon?
Thank you so much. Let me just take over here. Excellent. Okay, so thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. This is a great segue into where we want to talk a little bit about our security briefing today, because drift in the configuration settings, both at the Microsoft 365 tenant level and also at the user state or identity level, are critical for us to monitor because it's very easy for those items to drift. And as we'll be going through the security briefing today, it's 4 quick sections. 1, the hidden world of M365 security. 2, how are people and attackers draining, poisoning, and seizing your tenant? And then some incidents which definitely the C-suite can't ignore, and the concept of Microsoft 365 tenant resilience. So with that, the first item to cover is really defining the tenant. Most people think of an M365 tenant as one single blob, one single item. However, there's a clear definition between the tenant itself, which we are visualizing as the glass, and the water. So the glass can be, when we talk about the tenant and the tenant configuration, that includes every configuration setting relating to the tenant itself, identity, policies, conditional access, the settings for Intune, Exchange, sharing, any of the security tools that are covered under a G5 or a G7 license sit within the glass. And the water can be defined as the data, right? So when you think about applications, application data, the files, the emails, the Teams messages, SharePoint data, OneDrive data, etc., can be visualized as the water. And this definition between the two, before we dive a little deeper into why there are such challenges around managing configuration change in the Microsoft 365 world, is very important, because think about the amount of money that's spent in filtering and backing up that water, right? Everybody has numerous tools, whether provided by Microsoft or third-party vendors, to filter out the water for anything malicious, to catch anything that goes wrong, and also to be able to restore it in the case of any foul play with the data itself. However, very little thought has gone into the tenant over these years, and as a result, it's become a target of choice from bad actors. And why is that? The reason why that is the fact that Microsoft 365 isn't just an application. It is really a very highly complex cloud environment, which contains over 75 app and services, sometimes referred to as workloads, over 25 admin interfaces, making it very hard for the administrator to understand where to find the specific settings, over 12,000 configuration elements, and on top of that, over 120 different types of admin roles and 850 permission sets that can be applied on the environment. So keeping all this in mind, it gives the operators two big challenges. One is how to manage this efficiently and how to keep it secure. And in this conversation, we're going to be talking a little bit about how to consider drift, which Jennifer talked about very aptly earlier, which is the change in configurations after you've set it in order to keep your secure state, right? Everybody might be aware of the CIS baseline or the federal baseline, consider BD 2051, which identifies the right configuration settings to have for M365 in order for it to be considered secure and hardened. But the question is, what happens when that changes? And where does Microsoft's responsibility stop and yours start? So the clear way to think about it is Microsoft is securing the applications. They run the tool, they patch the tool, they keep the apps and services available. And your responsibility is taking that glass, making sure it is hardened, making sure the glass is backed up, protected, and also that the secure settings are set in order for you to be able to withstand the numerous attacks that are posed to the glass, right? So the glass is now a clear attack vector from all malicious actors. Why? Because they know that when you consider the percentage of people that are filtering and monitoring and securing the water, that's extremely high, in the high 90s. But when you go into the glass level, it's in the low 10s, right? So there's a less than 10% of the global tenant environment that is correctly secured and hardened, and an even lower percentage of that where the tenant is backed up and set for automatic restore or automatic rewind when any of those configuration settings are messed with. And the reason why those configuration settings are super important is that not only do they include all the access and identity settings relating to the tenant, they are also the gateway and the command and control center for all the security tools that you rely on to protect your environment. So it is critical for you to maintain control of the glass, because if a bad actor takes control of the glass, they've also taken control of the security tools that you have employed to protect you. And instead of protecting you, they can be turned around and used against you. So when you think about what are bad actors trying to do with the glass, they're mainly trying to do one of three things. Either drain the glass, so steal your data, seize your data, and those are the most common type of attacks, where people either steal your data or seize your data and ask for a ransom. But most recently, we've seen a high increase in data poisoning. So what does this mean? What does this all mean in very plain language? Is whilst identity compromise has become super simple, there are a number of ways now, a plethora of ways that people can walk through the front door, whether it's via traditional phishing, voice phishing, auth consent, attacker in the middle attacks, adversary in the middle attacks. All these things have, and token stealing, have made identity stealing super easy. And you don't even need to take a high level privilege in order to be effective, because with single sign on, you can, for example, imagine you take a single sign on for a nurse working in a healthcare institution who has a single sign on to their healthcare tool of choice, then that account can be used to, again, either drain or poison or seize the data. As you are an admin, you can conduct even more changes to the environment, right? And this is where we come to weak baselining and drift. So what is weak baselining? So we heard that the tenant setup and hardening is your responsibility. So when you think about a weak baseline, it's practically a standard or not far from standard setup of the tenant, which doesn't close all the windows and doors that you need to do in order to protect yourself. Now, there are situations where people have a weak baseline because they didn't know they should harden it, or if you did know you need to harden it and you go ahead and harden your tenant. The question is it changing? Is it drifting? And it drifts multiple times on a daily basis. Gartner, not long ago, released an article saying that 90% of drift in M365 environments happens from an admin just doing their daily job, because as they are navigating through those 25 interfaces and trying to apply the configuration settings needed for their colleagues and your colleagues to operate in the M365 world, they are inadvertently weakening the structure of the glass. But also when Microsoft pushes updates to their M365 environment, which as we all know we can't opt out of, that sometimes causes drift within the tenant itself, resulting in approximately 10% of the change. So we need to have a number of checks in place to catch this drift and restore the tenant to its secure state. And this is best done in an automated fashion rather than relying on human checks, because we know that human checks are only as strong as that moment that they are checked, right? Unless we have some sort of automated machine-driven functionality to check for this drift and restore it to its original point, obviously there is vulnerability within that. So the next question we get asked a lot is, what do you mean when you say privilege weaponization? Because one master key within M365 enables you to control all the tools you rely on, we have seen an incredible increase in people using privilege within M365 to take control of the security tools available within M365 and be used against the attacked party. We have seen, and most probably you have heard of the attacker called the Striker attack, where they took Intune and set it to wipe every single device on the environment. We have seen people locked out of their environment where they've had conditional access policies changed to set them to log in only from one specific location or IP address. We have seen Defender being used to block critical applications in their environment. So all these tools that are there to protect you can be controlled by this one master key. And when we talk about then what this one master key can do, once it gains access to your environment, it can also install Entra applications, which can be then remotely engaged way after the privilege session has ended in order to drain, poison, or seize the data, right, the water. So data tampering, on the other hand, is a little bit more complicated than just draining and seizing. So when we talk about data tampering, we are talking here about the ability for the attacker to change data at rest, data which you rely on, and then make it look like it's still the data that you thought it was, and business decisions or day-to-day transactions happen with tampered data. Think about the implication that that could have in your environment, whether it's in a healthcare environment, a financial environment, or anything to do with constituent data that could be tampered, allowing people to get access to benefits that they're not allowed to, people able to change diagnoses or medication for patients. All this is and can be extremely dangerous to anybody who has the data available within your tenant. And then considering the bad actor can tamper the configuration, it's extremely easy to not only drain the glass, poison the glass, or seize the glass, but actually to completely block access. And at that point, people have two options. They have the option to pay the ransom and hope that the ransomer is actually going to keep their word and restore access. But you always have in the back of your mind, what if there's something left in there that I haven't found? That's what happened to Jaguar Land Rover, for example. Even though they were able to get back access to their tenant, they were thinking, there's no way we can completely guarantee that we have a clean tenant. So we have to build a new one from scratch. And most people think of rebuilding a complete tenant from scratch as a simple item, but it's not as simple as it sounds, because you might be able to get a new glass from Microsoft, but before you can restore your water, the glass has to be the same shape, size, weight, and color. That means that we need to make sure that all the configuration settings that you've put in over the years are the same in the new glass as they were in the old glass before restoring it. And that takes a lot of time. If you are to do it manually, that takes weeks. And if you are to do it using an automated tool, then that can take hours. And this is what a number of states and both public and private entities have faced over the last years. So as we move to some examples, I've put here together just a roadmap of some of these attacks, some big attacks that have all been driven by configuration drift within the M365 environment. And some of them obviously have made the press and become very popular. But if we dive a little deeper into the details of each one, it becomes extremely interesting to see the three types of attacks that we see. The first one is generic bad actors, some driven by nation states, some driven by bad actors, well-known bad actors like Scattered Spider, for example. But what's really amazing is how, in many cases, the attack is just a copy-paste of the previous attack. For example, Scattered Spider, here in between April and May 2025, were able to attack three major enterprises across the globe in exactly the same manner, using exactly the same attack vector. Whether it is Stryker or other defense contractors that we've encountered where their environment was taken over and security tools like Intune or, for example, conditional access policies or MFA being used against the target in order to cause more disruption. We have seen environments where even months and days, weeks and months have passed before the full force of the attack is understood, as they leverage multiple tools within M365 in order to conduct the attack. We are seeing that nation states have become very smart in the way they are recruiting people in order to tunnel their way in state organizations because they understand that most states allow only in-state employment. So they are using tactics in order to gain access to an entry point within that state by installing a device within an environment within that state and then tunneling through that device in order to get a remote job in an administration role in order to make sure that they have full access. And once they do have full access, it is really pretty much game over because they don't even need to obtain privileged access. They get it as part of their job. And there have been a number of FBI takedowns, some of which are described here in this purple box that you can look up at your leisure and read about, but they are truly shocking. And then we have been involved in under NDA with multiple attacks within government entities, public entities, airlines, consultancy firms, banks, etc., which have faced the same attack methodology. And it's all because everybody is spending an inordinate amount of money filtering the water, but nobody's looking at the glass, right? It is a new attack vector that bad actors know that it's really hard for you to realize that change is happening. So having things that protect you and alert you if this drift is happening, which is happening at all times, is critical. So when you think about what's the cost of waiting versus acting now, right? Every quarter, as more and more people embrace Copilot, AI, and its agents, the blast radius is evolving and growing. Drift compounds silently. It's one change done by one administrator on day one, and then another change done on day two, et cetera, et cetera. We recently helped a global consulting company in the IT space who have moved 100% over to our environment to monitor drift. And they had over 21 drift items per week that they were unaware that was happening in their tenant. And imagine how that compounds over time. And every one of these drift items is weakening the glass. So practically by day 30, the glass is just full of holes that people can attack. And once they attack and take over your glass, they can control pretty much every control item in your environment. Rebuilding an environment manually is a matter of weeks. And audit findings, when you have a random audit, is very hard to conduct because it's really hard to trace who changed what, because some of the logs are runtime logs only, and as a result are not stored. Whilst we recommend acting now, making sure that CIS baselines and also the CISA binding operational directive 2501 are followed, that your tenant is hardened, giving you real-time drift alerting, making sure you can rewind to your known good state, whether that's your hardened environment or your preferred environment with one click, making sure that the automation is run in hours rather than in weeks, and that business continuity is kept. Because as we speak to customers and prospects, we see that the number one request is continuity. The second request is resilience. And as a foundational item to achieve both, we need security. So with that, I'll hand it over back to Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Simon. I actually, I do have some questions. You had a few things that you talked about. I didn't want to interrupt. One of them that you highlighted was your responsibility versus the vendor's responsibility, and really making sure to outline that. Mm-hmm. That's a common belief that we also share at GovRamp. It goes back to the whole assumption question. Don't assume that you know what they're going to do. I want to make it very clear. This isn't a dig at all at Microsoft. Simon works alongside them to help identify this. But if you are assuming that the product comes with a certain thing and it doesn't come with it, that's setting you up for some level of problem and heartbreak in
Disappointment.
the future. Yeah. I
So,
really appreciated that, and I think it's worth another call out to it, that you have to understand the difference between your responsibility and the vendors. I would say the same is true for GovRamp. We do a lot of the work of the security and that continuous monitoring that you kept talking about. It's so important to do that on a regular basis. You can't do it once at the beginning of a contract term and assume, just like you can't assume the configurations stayed the same over time. It's so important to do that continuous so that you're watching it and you know where it is and you have a fallback place. And I think that's one reason you are such a good partner with GovRamp, is we both believe in that continuous monitoring piece. So thank you for that.
JPL, if I can, I'll jump in real quick. So we've all been asked the question in our public sector days. We've all been asked the question, what keeps you up at night? And it always comes back to visibility. It always comes back to, can I see what's going on in my enterprise? And that may be even my folks, threat actors, but that is always what it always comes back to is I can't see what's happening. And if I can't see it, then I can't protect and I can't act. And so having visibility into the changes, as Simon talked about, that drift, understanding those and then being able to act on those, I think is a critical component of any security strategy going forward.
Absolutely. Jonathan, how many times have we all said, I can't protect what I can't see? I mean, it all comes down to that. From the GovRamp perspective, that's what we are trying to tell you about all of your third-party risk. If you aren't watching it, guys, I am in no way indicating that the vendors out there are somehow trying to be nefarious or trying to do things the wrong way. I'm saying if you aren't watching it, you don't know. You need that visibility, continuous monitoring all day long. And that's where you and I, we are 100% in step, Simon.
yeah, so this is a really good point because, like you said, it's Microsoft is not the only vendor out there who have complex SaaS environments. Even Salesforce, for example, you are responsible in their documentation. You're always responsible for identity and making sure you are keeping things in line with the secure recommended standards. It's just that the M365 platform is targeted by bad actors because it contains Entra, right? And Entra being the gateway to authentication and a single sign-on platform for most people. This is where all the bad actors know, let's go and target the identity piece in order to get ourselves access not only to one environment, but multiple environments. It's like a springboard onto the rest of the environment.
Simon, I have a question for you, and perhaps you don't know, I'm not sure. If you have this information because you're watching it, you're doing the continuous monitoring, how often should you be looking? I mean, a tool's only as good as the analyst behind it actually looking at the data. When do you start to know, hey, I've got more drift than I should have, or things are changing and maybe it's not what I had intended? How do you know that?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So, what we see that most environments have a policy to start off with one, making sure that their setup is hardened. So it's set in either the CIS or the CISA baseline in order to say, okay, this is the secure state. And then doing one of three items. Either we have customers who push out the secure state literally every 15 minutes to their tenants if they have multiple tenants, or one tenant if they have a single tenant environment, on a continuous basis to make sure there is absolutely no drift. but the most of our customers and the environments we see are turning on auto rollback. So once they set their secure state using the CIS or the CISA baseline, they are turning on auto rollback. So if any of those settings drift without following the correct approval flow, then they are automatically rolled back. And then we have the minority of customers who just turn on alerting. But because of the speed of AI, if an attack is AI driven, just getting alerting, by the time you find the alerts, it's too late. So what we recommend is the setting which will automatically roll back any drift from the secure state. And then it will also obviously alert you at the same time that it's happened. So you know that either you're under attack or one of your admins has inadvertently weakened the environment without wanting to, and you can find out what happened. There are processes which gives you a workflow in order to ensure that your environment has been changed based on an approved multi-person workflow versus just a random event, either a random event that is nefarious or just run-of-the-mill administration that happens and unfortunately weakens the environment.
And I think, again, we have a similarity with GovRamp. We do the continuous monitoring. We're looking at each of our vendors that's part of our program and making sure that things are where we want them to be according to the standards set out. But if the individual governments aren't taking a look at those and making the decisions accordingly, then it's no more than the alert that you were talking about. So it is very important to take action, not just have random alerts. I think we've all got alert fatigue at some level, but you've actually got to take action or allow some of that automation to do the work on your behalf.
Well, JPL, one of the things that, from a state perspective, sometimes if you, or just a public sector perspective, if you wait too long, the data, it's almost like analysis paralysis. I mean, sometimes you're handed a spreadsheet with 32,000 rows, and you're like, what can I do with this? So in working with states over the last, I'd say maybe 2 or 3 months here, one of the things that we're seeing as a constant is it's a daily process. And so they may have a change control process or a change control team that meets, say, on a Tuesday or Thursday or whatever. But daily, you're looking at those changes and you're understanding these changes were made, and I'm talking specifically in 365 here, but it applies to anything. But these changes were made on a daily basis. Do I want to accept these changes or do I want to automatically roll those back? And so by doing it on short periods, now your first 2 or 3 days, you might have quite a few changes to look at. But if you're doing it on a shorter period, say a 24-hour regimen, then you're only dealing with a small amount of changes. And that is actionable. If you wait a month, it's going to overwhelm you and overwhelm your team. And so that's why we're saying continually look at changes that are being made to your enterprise.
And that leads us right into that next piece, which is around continuous monitoring. This slide specifically, while some of it may be talking about the GovRamp piece of continuous monitoring, other parts of it are absolutely talking about what Simon really dove into, which is the continuous monitoring of your environment, not letting it get too far away from the desired state. Don't let it become a 32,000 long item list. Instead, work on it on a regular, constant basis. And I think that's where CoreView and GovRamp, we see very eye to eye on continuous monitoring. It is the only way to ensure security and not just checkbox compliance. Well, I have a tool, I deployed the tool, so isn't that good enough? No, it's not. So You want to talk any more on continuous monitoring and how that's closing the gap, Simon?
Yeah, I saw a question here from Boris Park. The question is, can you show where this is configured? Let's just really talk, really just answer very quickly here. So most of the configuration is done in the M365 environment through one of the 25 portals or via PowerShell, right? So this makes it very hard for an administrator to know, is the change that I made affecting the structure of the tenant? And that is why you have two options to know where to look. Either to use the manual tools, which is a guide, and you can have a spreadsheet that you kind of work through on a daily or weekly basis, but you're only as secure or as the spreadsheet, or you can use the automated tool that practically gives you a list of all the settings that you have. It matches it with the CIS baseline, and it tells you where you are not in line with their recommendation. And then it's nearly impossible to apply 100% of their recommendation, because that means you'll be as secure as Fort Knox, but not very collaborative. So you will find the right settings for your environment. And once you lock those down, that becomes your gold image tenant. And you can take that gold image and compare it as often as you want with your existing tenant, so that you'll know if there's any drift. So as soon as there's any drift, you can set the tool to rewind it in an automated fashion, or you can set it to alert you. Yeah. Now, which settings should you consider first? There's a whole variety. It's over 12,000 of these. This is why it's best made in an automated fashion. And they are listed on the CISA BD 2501 or the CIS baseline for M365. Yeah, I think that was one question which came in. I don't know if there was a second one. There's a question from Jeff. Is there any conflicting configurations between FedRAMP and GovRAMP requirements? So when you're operating in the GCC environment, they're pretty much equal. Once you go into GCC High, there are separate ones for those, because the services running in the back end are different in the GCC High environment than in GCC.
And I would add on top of that both FedRAMP and GovRAMP are following NIST 853 as far as their overall requirements. So it's going to look very similar from that perspective as well, with the specific mentions that Simon had. Any other
Excellent.
questions on that? So we've covered a lot today. But I'd like to bring us back to where we started at the beginning. How do you know your security expectations are remaining true? How do you know if something's changed? And how do you know whether one of those changes actually matters? And how do you know if you're prepared to respond? I think these are the questions that we have to keep asking ourselves internally. We have to keep asking ourselves externally to our partners, to our vendors. We have to keep asking these questions. What is your job in this, and what is mine? What is your expectation? What is mine? I think we have to keep asking those questions. Looks like we got another question in the group. From an audit readiness standpoint, can continuous monitoring of Microsoft 365 configuration drift serve as evidence of operating effectiveness?
Absolutely. We're seeing that more and more third parties are being asked to show the logs of any configuration changes within their environment. Now, the challenge is that within the Microsoft logs, there have been instances where they have publicly stated that the logs are best effort retention from Microsoft. So it is your responsibility to use a third-party tool like Corview or others that provide you two types of logs. All the logs of events that are happening inside M365 concerning, as we metaphorically refer to, the water, but also to keep a log of all the changes that happened on the tenant configuration. And another aspect which is very often underestimated is the user state changes, which includes not only identity, but all the requirements and logging around user state tracking. Now, the best way is to use tools that collect this information and collect the data logs, the tenant configuration logs, the user state logs, and most importantly, the ability to identify what are the changes that are also happening in your Entra applications. Because Entra applications, the way to think about them is really like service accounts from 10, 15 years ago, right? That we did a lot of effort at locking down service accounts and their permissions, but under the Entra apps concept, it's practically like they're outward facing service accounts. So any over privilege in an Entra app becomes even riskier, right? So it's important to get a hold of all those audit trails and make sure that you are keeping them, because in most environments, this is not applicable to everybody, but in most environments, we are required to maintain those logs for 7 years.
Any other questions from our attendees today?
I am just posting the 2 links that I've talked about, which is the CIS baseline for M365 and the BD2501 guidelines from CISA that will help everybody on the call.
Okay, with that, I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day today to join us and engage with us on this very important conversation. Our goal is not to suggest that there's one technology, one framework, or one control that solves cybersecurity. The goal is really to encourage a mindset, don't assume, verify. What you need to know what should be the truth. You need to know what is happening and know when it changes and be prepared to act. I want to thank you all so much again for this conversation. A special thanks to my guests, Jonathan and Simon. We appreciate CoreView for helping bring this conversation to life. Simon?
Yeah, there's just one more question that just came in really quickly here, Jennifer. Since we have a few minutes, it's also again from Boris. Boris, thank you for your questions. So we have auto rollback tools which work in GCC and are they're certified for government, they're being certified for FedRAMP, and the GCC High is coming later in next year. So if you are a GCC High environment, that will be reaching you in around August 27. However, the ability to roll back these changes are available in GCC standard environments as we speak. Thank you for your question, Boris.
JPL, one thing before we head, and we'll post it in the chat, but we'll also follow up. If you're like me, one of the first things you're asking is, well, how do I stack up against CIS, or how do I stack up against these standards? We've been on a mission. Simon kids me because I'm from the South and I call it an old-fashioned tent revival. But we've been on a mission to share this message. And one of the things we offer is what we call a health check. It takes about 15 minutes for us to gather the information, and then in a couple of weeks we can come back to you and tell you exactly how your tenant stacks up against those standards and where you might want to be looking in particular in protecting your tenant. So I think we're going to post that in the chat. But we will also follow up via email, so please answer the email when you get it, if it's okay. But just wanted to let you know we can follow up with that and provide that assistance.
And I think, Jonathan, that looks like to me one of those, you said you could do all these things, prove it.
Yeah.
Don't trust anyone, verify everything.
Verify it all. Correct.
Verify it all. Thank you all so much for your time today. With that, we'll turn it over and we'll say goodbye. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.